Good evening, everybody. It's Christmas time. I apologize for anyone that joined the call early and had to be subjected to the annual Mariah Carey insanity, but she's laughing all the way to the bank. And yeah, I figured we'd go some Christmas songs, as is tradition at this time of the year. Pretty much one of the very last sessions of the year in terms of Ask Tom Live. Oh, I should say, sing out on the chat line if you can't hear me or see me. Oh, there's a message on the chat already. Oh, good. Nothing, no alarming. You should all be able to chat with each other without too many dramas. It's a pretty casual night tonight. We'll do a couple of things that we didn't get to last month, but as is tradition, I always do for my last office hours of the year. I just basically, cover anything that hasn't been covered so far, do the normal user group and conference updates, and then it's just basically whatever people want to chat about. So I put out a thing on LinkedIn earlier today saying, if you've got any ideas you want to chat about, and if a few people DM me. So I've got a few things there with, there's no slides, just the topic, and I'll sort of talk about it. And but yeah, anything you want to put in there, we'll see how we go. So it might be a 15-minute session, it might be a 1-hour session. We'll see how we go. It's all just pretty relaxed. Okay, let me share my screen and we'll get into it. Okay, so hopefully you can still see me and hopefully you can see my screen. Let me do a bit of adjusting with my windows so I can see me as well. And keep an eye on the chat line as well. That's all happening. Where are we? Okie dokie. Now, as I normally say, I know it's a webinar, so we have Q&A and the chat line. I prefer it just all in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on things, but if I see Q&A, I generally just look at the chat. So go with the chat. That's the aim to go. So no, my dog got out. That's fine. So let's get into it without any further ado. As always, getting in touch is easy. Just scan the QR code, even with my ugly mug in front of it. It'll still work. It just takes you to the linktree/Connor, which is all the different social media ways of getting in touch with me. The @ConnorMcDonald is my Twitter account. My Twitter DMs are open. My Blue Sky DMs are open. My LinkedIn, if you want to message me, just connect with me first. Someone found out I was at the New Zealand conference last week and they wanted to message me. And they sent me an abusive message saying I had to sign up to LinkedIn Premium in order to message me. Apparently, that's the only way you can message someone if you're not connected with them. So if you want to message me on LinkedIn, easy. Just connect with me. I'll generally accept any connection, and then you can message me. Easy peasy. If you're new to Ask Tom Live, where have you been all this year? But if you are, you'll see all the slide content pushed away to the left. That's because we turn this into a recording and we put me at the top right, so we don't want to cover up any valuable content. As always, each month I talk about some bits and pieces as to what I've done, what's been coming up, etc., mainly just to keep promoting the importance of user groups and meetups and building our community. But first, some Christmas presents for you. My little plushie hat, there's the plushie in the background with a little Santa hat on. SQL Developer for VS Code version 25.3.2 is out. The key thing there is underneath your typical connection expansion, now you'll see a thing called AI enrichment. Now, you may have heard of this AI thing. Yeah, maybe just ever so slightly. What AI enrichment is when you're asking various models to deal with your database in terms of understanding what the tables are, what the columns are, etc. One of the things that we will go look at is what can we provide to the AI engine, the LLM, to assist in that process, because you've probably seen all those demos where we say, oh, look, it magnificently worked out that the countries table was called countries. Whereas obviously in the real world, in typical applications, the country table is called CX274 and stuff like that. So AI enrichment lets you assign effectively commentary to the tables and the columns in order to actually have that information provided to various tooling that involves AI, so they can actually make a more informed decision as to what the tables mean, what the columns mean, etc. Ultimately, these are stored in local tables inside your connection. That's what's done by the VS Code. Ultimately, we intend to use that because in this way, people don't have to be on 26AI, which has the native annotations and everything built in. Also, literally yesterday, what's that, 18th? Yeah, literally yesterday, 25.4 for SQL CL has just come out. So go get your brand new fresh downloads, some bug fixes and some enhancements there. Nice one there is some asynchronous facilities now in the MCP server. So you can basically have your MCP server wants to go run something and says, oh, that's going to take a while. That can now be put in the background. Ords Companion came out as well yesterday. New version of Ords, some bug fixes and some nice touches there. So new SQL CL, new Ords, etc. And in case you hadn't seen it, 23AI is now called 26AI, and you can download 26AI free, which is pretty cool. Now, in terms of bits and pieces, there was an awkward moment for me in the last few weeks. I logged on to my Oracle support, and I noticed that it had been modernized in terms of the user experience. It looked like it's all been, spruced up and looks nice and modern. Looks like a typical sort of Apex app. It's not Apex, but I thought, oh, that's nice. And so I pinged on LinkedIn. I said, oh, I like that. I logged in. I searched for my one thing and found it, and there it was. I thought, oh, good. We've done nothing to the back end. We've just refreshed the front end. And then the avalanche occurred where people in every form of social media just absolutely went to town on the new My Oracle support. And I'm not being critical of them for doing that. There's a basically number of significant issues that we discovered as we're going. I don't work for the support team, but I think everyone in Oracle understands we might have dropped the ball a bit on that one. And so we apologize. Just to reinforce, we endeavor to listen to everyone's feedback. We are on it. If you go into the new mods and search for News 21, we have a living document of what are known issues and the things we're actually trying to resolve about them. So things like people's old bookmarks, their old Mosnote IDs, etc. Things that, I fully concede we should have known about, we should have picked up before we went live. The reality is, we're now doing our best to get it back to an even keel to make it a nice new experience, because the UI I quite like in the sense that finally things like code is now presented in a monospace font, etc. But obviously, functionality wise, we didn't deliver, and so rest assured we're on it, and we hope to make it a nice experience for you. A couple of things. I've just got back from the Australian conferences, so I was at the Perth conference. A lot of fun. Big numbers there, probably the biggest numbers we've had for a long time, which is cool. So great to have some selfies with some people. That was in Perth and Melbourne, really good fun event. And then I popped over to Wellington, New Zealand. Once again, a lot of aces there, and we had a speaker dinner and some aces. Shout out to the aces there that were very involved in coordinating and running that event. Francisco, my mate there, talking about some high availability. And at the end of the conference, I hiked up Mount Victoria. I think it's Mount Victoria. Anyway, a very high point in Wellington. Took a bit of a hike, but that's Wellington, New Zealand. If you ever get a chance, go check it out. Absolutely beautiful part of the world. So what's coming up for me besides a little Christmas break? In February, I'll be back in India for their multi-cloud event. That'll be in Hyderabad and Bangalore. It's timed in February because also if you're from India, we've got the Cloud World, I can't say Cloud World. We've got the Oracle AI World global tour. I think it already starts, there's a couple already in January, maybe in Saudi Arabia, a couple other places. But in India, in Mumbai in February. And so we've got the user group events coinciding with that. So if you're a user group member, you can come to the user group events. Otherwise, you can head along to AI World in Mumbai. Okay. That's right. So Mohammed's on the Moz bandwagon. Yes, I agree. Rest assured, we have a large set of things we need to work on, and we're doing our best. Okay, so support your user groups. That's all I really had to say, because obviously it's Christmas break. There's not a lot of stuff going on. Now, what did I forget? There was something I forgot. Oh, yes, just a small little thing. Finally, 26AI is coming out on-prem. So if you go to that bit.ly link, that'll take you to the blog post. So the plan is in January, we'll have the Linux on-prem release for 26AI. That version will be 23.26.1. If you're unfamiliar with the naming structure that we've adopted, we didn't just jump from 23 to 26 just for giggles. The methodology was behind it is, if you're on 19C at the moment, which I'm sure most of you are, what are we up to? 19.29. It's got to a point where it becomes almost impossible to work out what is that? Is 19.29 the one that came out in July or October, or what year did it come out? And so with the going forward, version 23AI, which is now 26AI, will be 23.26.1. That'll be the first release update in calendar year 26. The next one will be 23.26.2.3.4. The year after that, it'll be 23.27.1. So now, at least when you look at your version number of your database, you'll know just by looking at the version number what release update you're up to. I'm up to the third one in 2027, etc. So yeah, it wasn't just marketing, there was method to the madness. And also that brings the database into a line with a lot of the products and facilities on our cloud, which have had that numbering system as in calendar year and then effectively the iteration of the release updates. So a number of products have had that for a while, and we're bringing the database into alignment. But yes, finally, the ultimate Christmas present, it'll be available on-prem. So what do we have to cover tonight? There were a few things from last month we didn't get to, which was the Truncate is very slow, cannot use UUID as a default in the new version of the Oracle database, and being able to do online reorganizations in standard edition. And then that's the end of my slides and demos. And then it's just what I called free Ask Me Anything. People ping me today, and people want to know how my PR and PT scripts work. Someone asked me what gear I use for my webinars and stuff, so we'll talk very, very briefly about that. The AI one was just a broad, like, where do you think AI is going? Is it going to be the end of my job, etc.? And then someone hijacked it. They sent me two questions, one about memory target and log buffer, and finally one about temporary table space groups. So those ones are me just waxing lyrical about my thoughts on those things. And but anything else you want to throw in terms of the chat line, just lob it in there. And this session's more about you, so you can, whatever you throw in questions you have in the chat, they'll generally take precedence. But let's jump onto our straight thing. Truncate is slow. Sorry, I just noticed that we've got 42 people on the call. The answer to the life, the universe and everything, a lot less numbers than normal, but that's okay. It's a week before Christmas. Truncate is very slow. Here's the question that came in. I thought Truncate just reset the high watermark and is always instantaneous, but on our data warehouse, it is very slow. What is happening? It is true that Truncate is fast, but before a Truncate can happen, something else has to happen, and that possibly might be slow. And it's difficult to demonstrate in the environment I'm in, which is basically small little machines and small little databases, but we'll do our best, and then we'll explain it in a little bit more detail. So let's do a demo. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. I've chosen a new font for my Windows terminal. It's a new monospace Consolas font, so hopefully it's looks a bit nicer. So what I've done is I've created a table here called, in a table space called large TS. That's irrelevant, but it's just 100 copies of DBA object. So in my database, there's about 80,000 rows, so that's about 800,000 rows. And I truncate it, and as promised, Truncate is instantaneous. So it's, it seems to make a mockery of the question. Let's drop it and let's do the demo again with a slight adjustment to the process. Once again, I create my table with 100 objects. Come on, poor little machine. And then what I'm doing is I'm updating every 40th row. And what's going to happen is I've updated what? That's 20,000. Is it 200,000 rows have been updated? Now, let me truncate again. Now, as I said, it's difficult on a small machine. You can see that the first truncate took about 0.05 seconds, and this one took 0.5 seconds. It was 10 times slower. Now, you can make an argument that that's pretty much instantaneous still, and that is. The reason it's like this is to do with the size of the amount of memory I can allocate to my database. So let's see what's going on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn a trace file on and repeat that same demo. So I need to find the name of my trace file, and I store that away. I drop my table. I'm going to recreate it again. Once again, 100 copies of DBA objects. Then I'm going to do that same update to put, to make some changes. And then I'm going to turn a trace on just before I do my truncate. So let's turn trace on, do my truncate. Once again, about half a second, turn my trace off. Now let's have a look and see where did we lose that half a second, even though it's a tiny amount. So this is simply querying my trace file. So if you're unfamiliar, you can query the trace files you created directly from the database. You look in VDOLA diag trace file contents, and the trace file name is the one I stored away earlier. All this business at the top here is just some smarts to not show the entire trace file. The moment I see the word truncate, from that point, I'm going to list everything out. So it just skips all the stuff at the top of the trace file. And I run that, and if I scroll back, we can say there's our truncate, and here's all the weight information. Lots and lots of little weights, each of a tiny amount of time, but they're all waiting on a thing called local write weight. Now, What is local write wait? Let's go back to our slides and do a diagram. So let's explore why a truncate might be slow. Let's say I've got some data on disk. I've just created that big table with 100 copies of DBA objects. And so inside, for example, one of these is file 3, block 7, and there's some data in a particular column. Doesn't really matter what it is, but let's say that data is AAA. I ran an update on that data. Now, an update drags information from disk into memory, and it changes the AAA to XXX. We've made a change. This block is dirty in memory. When I issue a truncate statement, the first thing the database has to do is flush all these dirty blocks out of memory back down to disk. And each time it does each one of those blocks, it's doing some I/O. It's DB writer, the background process is doing that. And the wait you see is called local write wait, the one we saw in our demo. This is DB writer flushing out these blocks to disk. So you think, why would you need to? I mean, why do I need to flush these blocks to disk? I'm about to throw these away anyway because I'm about to do a truncate. Why do I need to do this? Well, it's about contingency for what might happen after the truncate. Let's say I ran this truncate, which means effectively I've now flushed out all this information. It's useless to me. Now, because a truncate is instantaneous, I didn't go and update all these blocks, even though I conceptually erased the AAA here. I haven't actually erased anything. All I've simply said is all these blocks sitting in disk are now freely available for reuse. Anyone can reuse them because they're no longer required by this table. Let's say someone comes and creates a brand new table. Create a brand new table. Yep, I'm going to do a query from something else. It's literally brand new data. Those blocks can be reused by this. We can reuse those blocks. So it may put some brand new data from a different table, different rows, different columns, literally totally brand new data into those same file and blocks. So now it's BBB. Up here, I've still got this dirty block in memory. And at some point in future, DB writer is going to come along and say, it's time to free up some memory in the buffer cache so I can bring new reads in. I should flush out the dirty blocks. And of course, what would happen? We would actually overwrite someone else's data by flushing out those blocks. That's why we have to flush them out as part of a truncate to make sure that they don't get flushed out later and therefore corrupt the database. So that's why the truncate must wait for those dirty blocks to be flushed out. Now, why did it take only 0.5 of a second on my machine? Well, my buffer cache is about 2 gigabytes, and I've only got not a lot of memory here. But if you're running a big, heavy-duty Exadata machine, it's not unusual for SGAs to be in the literally hundreds of gigabytes, or even up to almost a terabyte of RAM. Modern hardware is just ridiculous. So if you've done a lot of heavy-duty work, a lot of DML on a massive table, it's quite conceivable you've got literally millions upon millions of dirty blocks sitting in the buffer cache. When you do a truncate, they all have to be flushed out. And so that creates these huge amounts of weight. So truncate is fast, but it's the preliminary steps that are needed before truncate, obviously are bundled up in the same thing, that can slow it down. So how do we avoid this? I noted here that you could either query the data or do a checkpoint. And there's a third option I should have mentioned, but I'll do those first two first. If you query the data, when you query dirty blocks in the database will flush them out. It's called a delayed block cleanout. There's a whole list of scenarios as to when that happens and when it doesn't happen, etc. But by and large, simply running a query after you've done a lot of your DML will flush those dirty blocks out. Therefore, a subsequent truncate will be very fast. The other option is just do an alter system checkpoint, which is you asking the database to simply flush out any dirty blocks. Same thing, you're paying that price such that your truncates are fast later. The third thing to be aware of is it's important to know that I view a slow truncate as perhaps an alarm bell as to the way you're coding your business logic. Because typically, if you're doing a truncate on a table, it's either transient data or it's data that's undergoing some sort of ETL, ELT kind of process. Typical thing of truncate some data, bring in tomorrow's data, etc. It's very rare to see a truncate in a typical OLTP application. It's very much about typical data warehouses or transient data, things you bring in from an external source, you manipulate it, and then you throw it away. That's otherwise, you generally don't want to truncate stuff that is valuable. If that's the case, if you're doing truncates on objects which are huge, I would recommend look at your application logic to see, why am I doing conventional DML on such large objects? The only reason you get these dirty blocks in there is if you're not doing direct mode operations. You should be doing these operations typically in parallel, for example, parallel DML or insert append or create table select, etc. All those things that are done as direct mode operations they bypass the buffer cache. They go direct against the data and bring the data into your local PGA. You're not going to have dirty blocks. So if you have slow truncates, yes, the quick fix is querying the data or doing a checkpoint, but maybe have a look at your actual application and see if it's potentially there to actually look at avoiding that DML and converting it to either parallel DML or direct mode DML where possible. And that's got it. Yep, exactly right. So, and I have to admit, it's one of those things where I do often wonder whether it would be a smart, whether we could actually, when we go to flush a block, we go, oh, we're flushing a block, but it's no longer belongs to the same data object number. Therefore, we can simply ignore it. But I imagine that would probably create more complications than it was worth. Okay, number 2. UUID default. I saw the cool new UUID function in 23AI, but I can't use it as a default, which seems to defeat the entire purpose of it. This seems strange. And the best way of describing that is, let's see what the problem is and see how you can easily work around it. But it is a bug and we'll fix that as soon as we can. So this one is running against 26AI. So it's the slightly different color. To explain why we invented a new UUID function in the first place in 26AI, we need to go back and look at our existing implementation. When we said we have a new UUID function, the first thing people said to us is, well, hold on, you've got a sysguid function. It's been there since Oracle 8i. Why not use that? And let's face it, I do select sysguid. Notice don't have to do from dual in 26AI. And look, I get a random raw string. You think, yep, there's my UUID. Why would I need to bother? Well, let's do a few of them, and you can start to see the problems. The sysguid function is, yes, a guarantee that you'll get unique sets of raw bytes every single time, but the way we did it was simply looking at some bits and pieces of the hardware. So you can see it looks like these are all the same, but if you dig down slowly, let's have a look. Where is it? It's somewhere in here somewhere. Where's my alt function? There we go. Oh, I missed it. There we go. There's the differences. Everything else is the same. The initial sysguid function that we built was very much like guaranteeing, yep, they'll always be unique. And I can't remember the exact specifics, but we used things like the MAC address and the host ID and a few other bits and pieces, and then a little bit of a random salting. So this is the problem. On Linux in particular, your sysguids are unique, but they're pretty predictable. They're not sort of a genuine, sort of totally random UUID. Interestingly enough, if you do it on Windows, you do get a much better random distribution, but there were obviously problems. So we invented a new function called UUID, which you can run on 26AI and above. And you can do select UUID 4, or you can do select UUID with nothing in there at all. Now, what does the 4 mean? Well, there's 7 kinds of UUIDs, and version 4 is just random. And so what will happen is now is, I should have done multiple iterations of these. What will happen now is each one of these is literally bizarrely different from every previous invocation. It is a genuine random UUID. We call out to the UUID function provided by the OS. Because of that, it would be nice if we could implement all the other UUIDs. In particular, version 7 of UUID has become very popular in the community at the moment, because what version 7 UUIDs do is the leading prefix of the unique part of the raw string is ordered by time. What that means is the fundamental problem with UUIDs where for lack of a better term, excessive randomness means you have a lot of B-tree index splits if you use it for a primary key. The version 7 UUIDs don't have that because they're prefixed by time. And so they work similar to an ascending sequence, but still with that nice randomness. So version 7 UIDs are very, very popular. We haven't implemented version 7 of the UUID because we didn't want to implement it by default in the Oracle kernel itself. We always wanted to defer to what the implementations provided by the operating system were. And so when the operating systems start providing it, our intention is to provide UUID 7 as well. I'm not sure about the others, but UUID 7 hopefully will be coming soon because that's a very cool but still random facility to have. To the problem of concern. If these new UIDs are super cool, which they are, it makes sense to say, well, I'm going to have an ID, it's going to be raw, and obviously it's going to be like an identity column, it's going to be default UUID. That's a primary key. Perfect. Doesn't let you do it. This is a bug, which should let you do it. It's just, unfortunately, a misinterpretation by the SQL engine at the moment. It thinks you're calling a pure SQL function, which it's not. It just doesn't understand that UUID is a native part of the database kernel. So it seems we're sort of hit a bit of a roadblock here. However, there's an easy fix. Create the table without the default to start with, and then alter it and add it as a default. Interestingly, the alter table command correctly understands that this is actually just part of the database engine. So as I said, it's a bug, but there's an easy workaround, and we'll get this fixed in a release update. Just to show that it works, if I insert into the non-primary key column values of 1 and then query it, you see I get my automatically defined UUID. So UIDs can be used as a default. Currently, it's just a two-step process, but we will fix that soon. Oh, there's a lot more people on the call now, like back to normal numbers. You people have no lives, dearie me. Okay, third thing that we had, and then we're jumping onto the Ask Me Anythings. Online it tells me to start my demo because obviously it must take a while to actually run. Okay, let's start it running and then we'll come back here. Here's the question that came in. I want to reclaim some space to speed up our full table scans, but alter table move online is not available in standard edition. What are my options without taking an outage? Well, that's the downside of standard edition. It doesn't have all the enterprise edition goodies, and probably the most valuable enterprise edition goodie I can think of, but probably after partitioning, is the ability to do so many operations online. Move data files around, move tables, convert tables to partitioned, etc. So many things. Ever since 12.2, it's almost impossible to do things not online in the Oracle database now, and that's unfortunately one of the problems that you don't get in standard edition. So I built some options to consider, which gets you very, very close to the online facilities in Enterprise Edition. It just takes more work on your behalf, or it takes more resource. You have that choice. But as I said, Enterprise Edition is very cool, and that's why we charge more for it. So let's have a look. So I've got Standard Edition running on a VM on this machine. So this isn't the normal database I use, so it will be a little bit slow because it's a downsized machine, but it's 19C Standard Edition. So I'm going to create a table here called T. It's simply 10 copies of DBA objects, so it's going to be about 800,000 rows, I think. I'll put a primary key on it, and it's 120 megabytes in size. So not big, but let's say that's the table that we've got. And what we've done is we've deleted half the rows over time. So this table occupies 120 megabytes, but I know that throughout this table now, I've got a lot of free space. I'd like to get that back. As you can see, I don't get it back just by doing a delete. My table is still 120 megabytes in size. If I was on Enterprise Edition, this is what I do. I just do alter table move online. The job's done. And it says, unfortunately, this feature is not enabled on Standard Edition, which it's not, and so you can't do it. You may be thinking, okay, I have to fall back to something more manual. I will use DBMS redefinition, which is a nice, easy way. You simply use DBMS redefinition to redefine your table to a table with the same structure, and that's a nice, easy way of doing an online reorg. And guess what? That also is not part of Standard Edition. Even though it's just a pure SQL package call, it is bundled up with the online facilities, and so you don't get that in Standard Edition either. For those of you on Enterprise Edition, just a quick shout out. If you ever want to redefine a table just by it to itself, the old days of having to create an interim table which was the same structure and then do the normal start redef interim sync, and then finish redef. We simply built a little simple wrapper around this. You can just do redef table now, which is just a nice, easy way if you want to move the table to a new table space or put the indexes somewhere else. There's other parameters if I want to compress the table, if I want to change the lobs to secure file, etc. There's a whole stack of parameters you can pass this procedure, but just for the sake of taking a table and doing a online redefinition to the same structure and just changing the way it's stored, this is a cool little redef table, came I think in 18C. So how can I do it? Well, what we can do is we can cheat to some degree. Is the way DBMS redefinition works is it creates behind the scenes a materialized view on your table, populates that, and then when you cut over, we do a final refresh and then flip the names around. It does all that, and it handles things like indexes, constraints, and all that kind of stuff. So we can do it going back to first principles. So I'll put a materialized view log on my table called T, and then I'll create a materialized view called temp$T, which is just a simpler copy of the table. It's refresh on demand. So if we look at it, my T table has 369,220 rows, and my materialized view has the same. So these two tables now are pretty much the same object. But obviously everyone's currently still talking to table T because I don't want to have an outage. So my table called T is 120 megabytes in size. My materialized view is only 60 megabytes in size because remember, I deleted half the rows out of my table T. So temp$T is the reorganized version of my original table T. So this is what I want my result to be, but unfortunately it's a materialized view, it's not a table, and it's a materialized view with a different name. Our job now is to see if we can flick those over. Obviously, activity is still going on. If this is an online operation, activity is still happening on T, and I'm simulating that just by deleting 17 rows from T. So T now has this many rows, and my temp$T has more rows because it doesn't reflect that last thing. I'll need to do a refresh. Now I can refresh continuously as I'm going, but at some point I want to actually do this, finish this reorganization and actually cut over. So here's where I would commence my outage. I can't get away with no outage altogether. I have to actually take a small outage where I'm doing the manual processes. So I do a final refresh of my materialized view. That brings the two tables now in sync. So everything that's in T is in temp$T, everything that's been removed is also gone. They're now identical again. Then what I do is I can drop the materialized view, but you can add a clause saying I want to preserve the table. So temp$T now just becomes a standalone table. It's no longer a materialized view. I can drop the materialized view log on T. I don't need that anymore. And once I've done that, I can rename T to it's gone and rename temp$T to T. So this is what I have to do in the outage, and all this stuff is virtually instantaneous. So the final refresh before it, you could basically try to keep that as small as possible, but you're still looking here at seconds and minutes as opposed to hours to actually unload and reload a table. Now, when you start doing things manually, as I said, the rest is left as a reader exercise. One of the benefits of having Enterprise Edition and DBMS redefinition, which is pretty much doing this kind of thing, is it's going to handle all these subordinate objects, the triggers, the comments, the grants, the indexes, the constraints, etc. All these things you now have to do manually and have to make sure that you tick off all the appropriate boxes. I've left it as a reader exercise to in the interest of time, but you get the idea of how you could do it. But that is a way of effectively mimicking DBMS redefinition in standard edition. So if we look now, a second example here, I've got a table called T1, which is also 120 megabytes in size. If I'm prepared to wait longer to actually do an online reorg with less hassle, less of that manual materialized view stuff, but I'm prepared to have it wait longer, which isn't maybe such a big drum because it's still online. Here's my T1 table. It's got 369,000 rows, so it's 120 megabytes, but I've already done the delete. That's why I started my demo early. I've already done the delete of the half the rows. I can enable row movement and do shrink space. Now this is a small table. This should complete relatively quickly. Shrink space is different to creating a new copy of the table. What shrink space does is literally hops out to the high watermark of the table and starts walking backwards, for lack of a better term, from the top down to the bottom of the table and moving data along in order to shuffle it toward the front. So it'll find a block that basically is at the end. It says, is there a free block somewhere at near the front? Grab it and move it over there. It's a block by block operation. I didn't time it here, but hopefully you can see it's going to run significantly longer than you doing the bulk operations of creating a copy of the table of the remaining rows, like a materialized view or even a CTAS. So this is online. It's less effort for you, but be aware that it will actually take significantly longer. It'll burn a lot more redo. You can choose if you want the triggers to fire, if that's important too, but just be aware that it's a simpler but more expensive option. But they're pretty much two options you could consider when it comes to basically doing online table move without a Enterprise Edition license. It is 9:35, and now we're into the free format stuff. Seeing as the chat is remarkably quiet, I'll do the ones on my bullet points. But yeah, if you have any things you want to ask or whatever, then feel free to chirp in, and we'll jump to the chat as we finish these off. So these are just some quick ones that have come in, which sort of generally haven't warranted and a thorough, I suppose, a thorough treatment. So a couple of quick ones. Someone said, how does your PR and PT scripts work? So to give an example of that, let's start with a fresh thing. If I do select, I can't type with the microphone here. If I do select star from EMP, in fact, let me start with this one first. This is one I used to have. Select PT, select star from department. If I could reach around my microphone. Do I not have a department table? No, that's no good. Let's go. Let's move the microphone. It's killing me. Let's build our department table. So this is the PT script that I've had for a long time. Tom Kite first wrote this. That is, you've got a query, you're worried about the width of the columns, and so you want to print each row down the screen as opposed to across the screen. So the PT script's been around for decades. It was written by Tom, and I manipulated it a little bit to do some work. To actually see what it does, it's relatively simple. The way the PT script works is it treats it as dynamic SQL. Your query comes in, and then all it does is, let's go through, it changes your date format, so it prints out things like hours and seconds, just in case. It turns on cursor sharing equals force, because typically when people are just doing ad hoc queries, they're going to do literals in their query, so we basically force them to bind variables. We simply parse the query, we get a listing of the columns, where are the columns, and then for each column, we effectively define a result for them. I think 1113 might be a time zone column, a timestamp with time zone. So either way, we're simply defining all of them to be varchar 2s, we execute it, and then we simply loop through. So it's simply dynamic SQL. Because we're using DBMS SQL, we get access to each row and each column value, and then we're simply just printing them out using DBMS output down the page instead of whatever, and then that's the end of it. Now, the PT script was cool, but of course, at the end of it, you end up with sort of, you have to sort of know that you wanted to actually run. You need to know that I want that down the page. Tanil Poda took that and did a very cool thing with it. He said, well, what if you're simply typing a query like that and you go, oh, hold on, I want to get the results down the page. It's a pain to go back, especially if it's a multi-line query, to go back and actually retype it with the PT in front. So he manipulated the script to say you could just do at PR on the next line, and it does the same thing. So the question is, how does that work? Well, let's cat it out. In fact, what I'm going to do is put out this one. I might be able to actually run that one. Let's try that. I think I made a PR1 version, which doesn't, yeah. So PR1, this effectively what it does. It says, I'm going to take your file and prefix all these. No, let's scrap that. Let's actually look at PR1. That's probably going to be better. So this is Tanel's script. It's the same logic as the PT script, but uses some nice little trickery using the SQL Plus buffer. So when you run at PR, the first thing it runs is run the dot. This is okay, terminate the current SQL statement. So the SQL statement is in the buffer. I've done select star from department. I'm saying I'm finished with that. And then it says store that in a temporary file. So I've simply defined a file here, store it. So simply store that SQL out in a file. Then what I'm going to do is run all these commands, and then because SQL start at line 1, I put these two things at the front, and all these things get added to the end of the SQL buffer. So I put this first, and then the next one will simply go in front of it. Notice it's in reverse order here. So I'm saying that is now line 0. When I say that's line 0, this becomes line 1. Everything gets pushed down. So what I'm doing is I'm doing that at the start. Then I have my original SQL, which might be lines 1 through 12. And then I simply say from 999 onwards, end my SQL, and then repeat the Tomcat kind of code, parsing it in PL SQL. So this is a way of intercepting the current SQL buffer, saying I want this at the front, store the original SQL, put this at the front of it, put this all at the end of it, and then run it. When I've run my query, go and get the original SQL. I saved it and bring it back into the buffer. And that way, when I do select star from department at PR, it runs it, but notice this is still in my buffer, just like it was before. Right? In fact, I should have done list, shouldn't I? If I do list, yeah, that's back in my buffer. So it intercepted the buffer, put a whole lot of wrapper around it, ran the PL SQL block, and then got rid of the PL block and restored the buffer, so it looks like nothing was changed. So that's how PR and PT work. Very cool little utilities. Gear, that's an interesting one. Someone asked, what gear do I use? What I'm talking to you now is a Canon DSLR, only because I'm into photography. Some of the modern digital SLRs have automatic, what they call webcam functionality. The latest Canons, the latest Sonys, you simply plug in a USB connector and plug it into your computer, and it just thinks it's a webcam. This one's a little bit older, so it doesn't have that. So I had to buy a thing called an Elgato Cam Link, which takes the HDMI output from your camera, goes into a little box, and that comes out as USB. So it convinces your laptop that your camera is now a webcam, even though it's a fully fledged digital camera. So it's just in video mode, recording in 4K, and I've also got a splitter box. So I got one that sends it into my Zoom recording, so you can see me on Zoom. I've also got one that sends it into another machine, which is just recording just the video. So at the end of my Zoom recording, I've got the recording of the slides, and I've also got a separate recording of my video, and I can just splice them together with editing. So that's my gear. The microphone is a Rode Video Mic Pro. I bought this because this also will sit on top of the camera. So if I'm doing, walking and talking, I can use it on top of the camera, or I can just sit it here on a tripod. That's a little Joby tripod, and it works like that. If you're interested in making videos, one thing I would recommend is don't worry about the video quality too much. What really matters is the audio quality. People will forgive, mediocre video, but they will not forgive terrible audio because it's just so annoying on the ears. So be aware of that. Okay. Okay. Eric's asked, where is the PR script is? If you go to my GitHub repository, so in that linktree/Connie, you'll see a link to my GitHub repo. Somewhere in there, you'll see a thing called miscellaneous scripts. And underneath miscellaneous scripts is all the scripts I run in my office hours sessions, and PR, PT, and etc. So yeah, so they're all on my GitHub repo. Okay, memory target. Share the link. Look, obviously someone hasn't been scanning my QR codes. Dear me, let me put it in the chat line. Okay, I'll do. There we go. That's the link to everything about me, and somewhere in there, it's either, and I think it's either that. I can't remember my own GitHub, or what did I just do then? And it's either one of those two from my GitHub repo. Man, lesson learned, do not put your microphone in front of the keyboard. It's debilitating. Okay, 9:44. Okay. Some really quick ones to talk about. Okay, memory target. Okay, quick little backstory. Back in the day, back in Oracle 7 and Oracle 8, when you set the memory for your system, you had your shared pool, your buffer cache, your keep cache, your recycle cache, your log buffer, your Java pool site. There was 37 memory parameters to set, and it was just getting silly. especially as we kept adding more and more memories, large pool, streams pool, etc. So in 8i, I think, maybe 9i, somewhere around there, we said there's two, SGA target, PGA aggregate target. For your shared memory, how much shared memory do you want, and how much private memory available for sessions do you want? Nice and simple. Two parameters, job done. And people thought, well, can we do better than two? Maybe we can get to one. So in 12.2, I think, we introduced memory target parameter. We said, don't worry about the fact that half the memory is shared, half is private. Just give us one value, memory target, give us a value. We'll decide on how much is shared, how much is private. Now that came with some one particular nasty restriction, and that is if you use the memory target parameter, you didn't get access to huge pages, which are critical on any significantly sized database. Because if you have little tiny pages, the cost of page management, memory page management, becomes insane. These things called page table lookups become very, very slow. So huge pages is important for any serious database, and therefore we would say, look, memory target is maybe not for that because you couldn't use huge pages. As a result, our recommendation was if you have a database less than 4 gigabytes of memory in size, so maybe it's an embedded system, you're never going to touch it. Memory target's perfect for that because the fact that you might have different requirements for shared versus private memory over time. It's such a small amount of memory anyway, the database will be fine. The page tables aren't going to be huge because it's a tiny amount of RAM. The moment you went above 4 gigs, we said SGA and PGA target, two parameters, keep them separate. The later versions, like the later versions of the database creator configuration assistant in some of the release updates for 19 and certainly in 21 and in 26, if you tried to set memory target for a machine bigger than 4 gigs, it would actually pop up a warning and say, please don't do this. In 26AI, this is the reason this question came in. In 26AI, memory target is now compatible with huge pages. You can have huge pages with a memory target. So the question is, what should you do? There isn't an official position, but what I did recently is I created 2 VMs for 26AI. One was a small VM, one was a large VM, and just accepted all the defaults. Interestingly enough, when the machine was smaller than 4 gig in size, database configuration assistant chose memory target. When the machine was bigger than 4 gigabytes of RAM in size, it forced me to choose SGA and PGA. So even though we don't have an official document on it yet, I think you can safely assume that even though we have huge page support, our official position will be if you have a significantly sized system, aka anything bigger than 4 gigs of RAM, then you still should be using the two parameters, SGA target and PGA aggregate target. I know that's definitely the case for anyone that's running Exadata on 26AI, so I think we can safely assume that's going to be the advice. So be aware, memory target's going to be the same, two parameters, even though we now support huge pages with memory target in 26AI. Thanks, Elaine, for putting in that link to PR to SQL. But not just the one script, there's lots of goodies there. Hopefully you can get lots of value out of all those things. Log buffer, next one. Once again, a little quick DM come in saying that someone had just migrated, luckily, from a non-Exadata system to an Exadata system. Big, hulking great Exadata. They're very, very happy, very, very excited. But they said their log buffer is a gigabyte in size. And they said that just seems insane because, most of us are familiar with log buffers being 64 meg, 32 meg, etc. How the hell does it get 1 gigabyte in size? Log buffer, if you look in the documentation, says it's by default, it's chosen by, I think, number of CPUs divided by 16 or something like that. I can't remember exactly. Be aware that formula is a bit of a generalization. It depends on the platform. But in particular, if you have these big hulking boxes, Exadatas, and even non-Exadata boxes, where they've got 128 cores, and then you've got hyperthreading enabled, and etc. In particular, you look at some of the AIX boxes, which will expose a single core as maybe 8 virtual cores to the database. It's not uncommon to see a machine saying, "Oh yes, I've got 500 cores." And so what that means is the database goes, "You've got 500 cores. Oh yeah," and therefore, CPU cores determines a lot of other defaults as well, things like transaction count, session count, etc. All those things get multiplied upwards. So your transactions parameter becomes tens of thousands, your sessions parameter becomes tens of thousands. And all those things get used in determining, for example, how many public and private log buffer strands are allocated inside your log buffer area. And so it's not uncommon to see the log buffer just get very, very, very large. So there's nothing to worry about. It's just chosen that way. But one thing I will say is if you have a large log buffer, be aware the database assumes that you'll also have extremely large redo log files. The database assumes the order of magnitude between log buffer and redo log files is large, 10 to 1, 20 to 1, etc. So if you see your log buffers get huge, don't be going with those 200 megabyte log files, those redo log files. You want them in the gigabyte range as well, like large. Make them much, much larger than the log buffer. Otherwise, you start seeing strange behaviors where your logs start to switch just randomly. So be aware of that. If you have a massive log buffer, that's fine. It's meant to be large, but also that means make your redo log files huge. If you want a more detailed explanation of that, I think, who was it? It's either Tanel or Jonathan, maybe Jonathan. Maybe search for Jonathan Lewis archive log switches or Tanel Poda archive log switches. I can't remember. I read something about it years ago, but something like that. But be aware, if you want a more in-depth discussion of that, there's some information out there on the intertubes. Temporary tablespace groups. For those unfamiliar, we introduced a technology some time ago called temporary tablespace groups. You can create 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 temporary tablespaces, temp 1 to temp 9, and then you can say, oh, they all belong to a group called, group number 1. And then group number 1 becomes your temporary tablespace. So people can be allocated any one of the tablespaces inside that group of tablespaces. The original motivation for this was very much along the lines of when you have rack systems, what would happen is one instance would end up stealing extents from the temporary tablespace from other instances, and therefore you get cross-instance chatter when you're doing very large, in particular, say, parallel operations, which use a lot of temporary tablespace. So temporary tablespace groups were a mechanism to avoid that because each instance would grab different tablespaces within the group, therefore that kind of cross-instance chatter would be eliminated. I was talking to people internally because someone asked, why do we have them? That's why we have them. I was talking to a couple of guys internally, and we'd sort of come to the conclusion that I'm not entirely sure they're probably needed anymore. Those problems have been subsequently solved via other means. You may be familiar with Rack now. We can have local temporary tablespace. You can actually attach a temporary tablespace on a local disk, not shared storage, to a local instance. I haven't really seen temporary tablespace groups that much out in the wild. They were there to solve a particular problem, in particular about cross-instance chatter, especially for large parallel query slave numbers. But I think if you're using local temporary tablespaces now on your rack instances, you probably don't need temporary tablespace groups. If you've never heard about them, don't worry about them. This one, I tweeted this today actually, but it actually because I just couldn't resist. But it actually came in just as a question for tonight, which is, why do we get insufficient privileges on materialized views? And I can show you one very simple reason why. Let's just go into here. Let's move the microphone briefly. There we go. Insufficient privileges. This is an interesting one. If you try refresh a non-existent materialized view, this is the error you get. I think this is a bug, but this is how it's always been. I did a trace on that. What happens is it goes and looks for your materialized view name in an internal dictionary table called sys.snapdollar, which is a throwback to, they used to be called snapshots. And it also looks in there because it wants to see if your materialized view references a database link. So it does a query to that. And what it does is that query also looks up your permissions. And so if it gets a no data found, it says, it's because you didn't have enough permissions to refresh this view, which of course is assuming that you've actually spelt the name correctly. So it's one of those things where one query satisfies both existence and permissions. And when it gets no data found, it goes, it must have been permissions. So just be aware of that. The reason I mentioned it is if you do the correct name, you can still get this error because later on in the processing of materialized view, it might need the create table privilege. If your materialized view is a non-atomic refresh, it's effectively a truncate and a rebuild from scratch for a complete refresh. be aware that sometimes you get insufficient privileges because you don't have the create table privilege, which of course makes this all the more confusing. It's all a bit sad. And what have we got? 5 minutes left. Okay, and the last one, a few people ping me about AI and the like, and the AI one was really, a common theme is, will AI take my job as a DBA? Will AI take my job as a developer? Is AI going to be good for the database, bad for the database, etc. I probably have to defer that because we haven't got much time. There's a sort of a cliche that's going around is they say AI won't take your job, but people with AI skills will take the jobs of people without AI skills. I think that's a bit flippant, to be honest. I certainly think AI is here to stay. I don't think there's any escaping it. It's got probably as much hype as I remember when the internet started up, and like sort of in the early 2000s when everything was wasn't internet. Everyone was calling it the World Wide Web, and everyone said it was going to be the game changer. I see AI in that similar vein, in the sense that it's become just so everywhere now that I don't think we're getting away from it. I don't think as a IT professional you'll lose your job if you don't have AI skills. Having said that, I think it's in everyone's interest to learn AI skills, even if you never end up putting them to play, in your current work job, because like all things, the market looks for the current hype cycle when it's employing. So whether you choose to get a new job or whether you're forced to get a new job, whatever that case is, having some sort of AI knowledge on your resume, even if you never plan to use it, is going to be helpful for you in a future career. And in that respect, I view AI as the same as any skill in the IT workplace, in the sense that the industry rewards broad skills nowadays. The days of, I'm an expert in this tiny, narrow area, I think are gone. I think people now look for broad level of competence across a wide range of things, as opposed to people looking for experts anymore. And that's why I try to keep my hand in terms of not just the database, but in terms of development and tools, et cetera, because I think it just, broadens you as a professional, and also gives you, I think, a deeper level of empathy for people who do other jobs. I hope the days of DBAs dunking on developers and developers dunking on DBAs are coming to a close, because with DevOps, developers now understand a little bit of the challenges of operational work, and DBAs, hopefully, with having to look after things like Apex and things, are a bit more familiar with what the challenges developers face. I think that helps our community as a whole. So, as I said, normally we'd open up for all your questions, but we're out of time, which is not unusual. So on that note, it's very rare that I finish 2 minutes early, but we are finishing 2 minutes early. But normally at this time on the last Ask Tom Live of the year, the last few years, I've always popped a champagne to say celebrate the year. I got grief from some of my, some close friends in the community said, we know you don't drink champagne. You only ever drink spirits, and like I got my gin collection behind me and whatever. So I thought I'd break with the champagne tradition. I'd do my friends right. So I thought we would, bit of a little whiskey. I thought we would toast the year with a little drop of whiskey. But in reality, really, this is me just by saying thanks for being a part of our Ask Tom community and the Office Hours community and the general Oracle community. I hope you've had some value out of the sessions this year. Obviously, we'll be back next year. We always love the fact that you participate, you give up so much of your time for free. And hopefully, if you're an event somewhere around the world that I'm at next year, please come say hello. I'd love to do more face-to-face talking as opposed to this. But if we only meet up over Zoom once a month, that's still good enough for me. So have a safe, if you celebrate Christmas, please celebrate it very well. If you don't, please have a festive and happy and very safe holiday season. Take some time off, spend some time with your loved ones, and I'll see you again next year. And yeah, have a great festive season, everyone. Bye for now.